All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Thursday, November the 19th. Woo, we're getting close to the end now, hey? How's the workload? Is it increasing? Or is it okay? Aliana's holding her head like in terror. We're getting very close to the end. Speaking of the end, yesterday we talked about the final paper that I assigned to you, and there was a few things that I talked about that weren't on the assignment sheet, and I was a little confused, but I think I deleted them, and then I put it onto Microsoft Teams. So I fixed that, and I added a new version of that document to Microsoft Teams. So there's nothing really new on that assignment everything on everything on that new assignment sheet is stuff that I talked about yesterday. So I just put it in writing so that it's clear. Okay, so I updated that. I updated that on Microsoft Teams so you can look at it. But again, there's nothing really new. It's just I meant to write it all down, and somehow I managed to delete it before I put it on there. So that is now there. Yeah, let's say hi to some people. So Mike is here. Good morning, Mike. And Clara's here. Hello, Clara. And John is here. Good morning, John. And Vicky is here. Hi, Vicky. Gabrielle is here. Hi, Gabrielle. Daniel is here. Good morning, Daniel. Chan is here. Good morning. And Miles is here as well. Good morning to you. Okay, so yesterday we talked, and Sala just under the wire. Morning, Sala. Yesterday we were talking about oppression and power, and we were talking a little bit about internalized dominance and internalized oppression. And so I guess this wasn't yesterday, this was the day before yesterday, but we read an academic article and we came to the conclusion that in a society where we have dominant and minoritized groups, so where we have men and women, and when we have white people and people of color, that the sort of oppressive nature of society actually, to some degree, influences people's individual interactions, right? And so here we see in the classroom, Shavella Pittman interviews a number of women faculty of color, and she discovers that they seem to be having kind of consistent experiences with regard to white male students, right? And we said that in her article, she explains that white male students seem to challenge female or women faculty of color in a number of different ways. And we were suggesting, of course, that that had to do with internalized dominance, right? We said that white people, and probably in particular white males, they constantly receive the message that their kind of way of thinking about things and their experience and their views and values are either the most important ones or that they're normal and legitimate, right? And so we said that it's probably no accident that white males feel that way, because if you look at a lot of our media, for instance, television shows, you'll see that a lot of those are the stories of white people. And we agreed that, yes, there are some diverse characters in there, and increasingly as we move into 2018 and 2019 and 2020, we see that diversity is actually increasing, which is excellent. However, despite that fact, a lot of these shows continue to be told from white perspectives, and they tend to be the stories of white people. And diverse people of color, really only play supporting roles in a lot of these stories, right? Yeah, like on Friends. We said that this kind of extends to other forms of media as well. So traditionally, comics have been predominantly white, right? Most characters are in fact white, and here, this is kind of a 1980s version of the Justice League. But even so, you can see that all of these people, all of these heroes are white, with the exception of Martian Manhunter, who is green. So we can get a green guy on the team before we can get a black person on the team, right? So again, that's a bit of an issue, but in the 80s it wasn't really seen as one. But here, again, we see that justice and heroism is almost exclusively attributed to white people, right? And again, maybe that's no surprise too, because people in the West actually envision their God as looking like this, right? So here we have a painting of Jesus. I'm not sure where this painting comes from, but I think it's fairly in line with how we often see Jesus portrayed, right? He's often wearing white robes. He's got usually long brown hair. Usually has a beard of some type. And we see him looking like this. But this is very clearly a white Jesus, right? This is a white depiction of what Jesus looks like. And again, scholars a number of years ago tried to sort of reimagine what Jesus might have looked like, and they came up with something like this. And so, again, we don't really know what the historical figure Jesus looked like, but this is more in line with what a Palestinian or a Jewish person living in Palestine 2,000 years ago, this is probably a little more realistic in terms of what they would have looked like. They likely would not have appeared white, because white people don't come from the Middle East, right? And so, again, but we imagine, because the West imagines Jesus and God himself as white, what kind of effect does that have on people who are white in society? And maybe more importantly, what kind of effect does that have on people who are not white, right? How do they perceive their place in society and their place in the world when God, like the most powerful being or force in the universe, is imagined to be a white person, right? What does that mean, right? How do people process that piece of information subconsciously, right? And again, I think Daniel pointed out online, he said, wow, if Jesus was portrayed as a black man, that would change a lot of things, right? And I think Daniel's right. That would be a very different way of thinking about things. But what is it? But what does it mean to think of Jesus as white, right? As opposed to something else, or as opposed to this, which again is probably a little more realistic of what he might have looked like for real. So we see this depicted in religious art. Here we see, of course, Adam and Eve, both depicted as white people, the first people that God creates, the people that God creates in his own image. Here the artist has imagined them as white, right? And we said that has effects on people. It had an effect on Blumenbach, who was the scientist who created those races based on measuring skulls, right? He kind of believed this. He believed the message from this artwork, the idea that, the first people created should be imagined as white. And again, well, that's a complicated question, because Adam and Eve were probably not historical figures. If you didn't believe in Christianity, most people would say that Adam and Eve did not exist. But even if you don't believe in Christianity, most people, I think, suggest that Jesus was an actual real life person. And whether you view him to be the Son of God, or whether you just view him as a person who was preaching something 2,000 years ago, whatever your kind of beliefs about him, I think a lot of people would probably agree that he was a real person. He really existed. Adam and Eve, if you didn't actually believe in Christianity or Catholicism, you would probably not believe that. But anyway, here they are depicted as white, right? We said that when we look at movies, of course, I'm going to back up. Movies give us all kinds of social information, right? They give us ideas about what's good and bad and right and wrong, and how to be a man and how to be a woman, and what relationships look like with our family and with our friends, and how to find love and what is love and all of that stuff. But again, the question is, whose stories are these? And if you look at a lot of the most popular films worldwide, you'll see that the ones that make the most money and the ones that are kind of seen by the most eyes, or some of the most eyes, are almost all directed by white men, right? And so again, a huge amount of storytelling is coming from a very small group of people, but they get to tell the stories and they get to kind of define all kinds of things. They get to define all kinds of norms based on their movies, right? Oh yeah, and we talked about one of the things that sometimes comes out of these movies, or one of the ways in which stories are told, have to do with this kind of white savior narrative, right? And we said in a white savior narrative, we usually have a white character who finds themselves among non-white characters and somehow rescues them in a way, right? And so the white person gets to be the hero, the white person gets to learn something about themselves, white audiences get to feel good about the whole experience, but often the people of color that are represented in movies like this are viewed as kind of powerless or unable to help themselves. Sometimes they're viewed in very stereotypical ways. And so these movies are kind of trying to do something, right? They're trying to tell a story, and in some cases they're trying to make the statement that racism is bad and we should get over this prejudice, which is true. But sometimes the message is undermined by the fact that the people of color in these films are viewed as powerless or stereotyped, or just unable to have any agency, unable to kind of do anything for themselves. George?
Is there a movie where like the white people is like the bad guys and the black people is like the good guys?
I would say there's very few. So George's question is there a movie where the white people are the bad guys and the people of color are actually the good guys? I think the only one that springs to mind is Get Out. Yeah, Get Out. But even Get Out is brand new. Like, is it 2 years old? 3 years old. And of course, it is directed and written by a black man, right? Daniel's suggested also Black Panther, right? And so Black Panther is, are white people the enemy?
Oh no, it's like the black too.
What's that?
The enemy is the black people too.
Yeah, that one's a little more cautious, I think, right? So obviously black people are the hero of that story, right? T'Challa and Shuri, and they're the heroes. But also Eric Killmonger is the villain, but also maybe a sympathetic villain in some ways too. And then there's what's his name? Klaus? No. Who's Andy Serkis's character? The guy with the arm? What's his name?
Bucky, yeah.
What?
The guy with the
No, not Bucky. The guy who's stealing the vibranium from.
Oh yeah, like the white guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but he was killed.
He was killed. But he's a bad guy in the film. Was he killed?
Yeah, he was killed like by
Did Ultron kill him, or did Eric Killmonger?
yeah, Eric killed him.
Eric killed him? Okay. I kind of forget. Yeah, but even those movies are brand new, right? Like only in the last few years have we started putting people of color into the role of the main character and the hero. And even when we do, often white people are not the villain, right? And Get Out is kind of revolutionary in that way. Actually, there's also kind of that subtext to, if you look at since we just finished Halloween, if you look at George Romero's original Night of the Living Dead, you'll see that there's a dynamic there as well, where one of the main characters who's fighting off the zombies is a black man. And he's kind of very heroic, and he sort of gets the, spoiler alert, plug your ears if you don't want to hear, but he kind of lasts till the end of the movie, and then he's actually shot by a group of white men who think he's a zombie. So, yeah. But that's a long time ago. The original Night of the Living Dead is 1964 or 3, something like that. So even that was pretty. Oh no, it was. I think it was 68 or something like that. But even that was kind of non-typical for movies, right? That's a challenging thing for a director to to do, and a lot of directors don't do it. But now, again, we're seeing more diversity in representation. We're seeing movies that are entirely about people of color. So Crazy Rich Asians, of course, from a couple years ago was a big deal because basically the entire cast is Asian people, right? Which is, it seems shocking that we've never actually had a Hollywood movie like that, but we have not, right? And so here we have a movie. Has anyone seen it? Did you like it? Was it good?
What's good? It's Crazy Rich Asians.
It was good? What? Crazy Rich Asians? Yeah. Yeah. My girlfriend was asking me the other day. She was like, she says like, please tell me that like this is a Crazy Rich Asians situation where like I'm secretly a very rich guy, but like she doesn't know and nobody knows. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. Huh? That's the story. But she's hoping that's the story with me. Yeah. And so I had to very disappointedly tell her that that's actually not how it is. I'm not crazy rich, nor am I Asian, but I am not crazy rich. So we were both equally disappointed in that fact. I would have loved to be able to say yes. I would have loved to be able to say, yep, you're right, I'm very rich. Let's go hop in my helicopter and go somewhere, but it's just not how it is. Okay. Sala says Black Lightning. Does anyone know Black Lightning?
Is it like a DC movie?
It sounds like it.
Yeah, like the lightning guy.
The Lightning guy. Well, there's Black Adam with Dwayne Johnson with The Rock. That's coming out soon-ish. He's a person of color. There's Black Klansman. Oh, I haven't seen Black Klansman. That's another one that's probably very interesting, but I don't know the storyline of it. But again, a lot of these movies are very recent, right? So Black Klansman is just in the last couple of years. Black Adam isn't even out yet. I don't know about Black Lightning. Black Panther is what? 2018. Black Panther is a couple years old, right? So Get Out is a couple years old. So all of these movies are kind of just getting there, right? And so, yeah, we've made progress, but it's taken a long time, right? Right, so this white savior narrative often has, again, white people entering into some sort of situation with people of color. Sometimes they're in a foreign country, sometimes they're overseas somewhere, sometimes they're in their own country, sometimes they will adopt a child of color, like in The Blind Side. But either way, the white person is kind of framed as the hero of the story, and people of color are often represented stereotypically, or they are kind of powerless to change their own plight, right? And so it makes the hero of the white person. And again, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is a perfect example of this kind of situation where he saves this, the children of this Indian village, and it's very heroic and exciting, but it's not a very empowering movie for people of color, right? Although it's still an okay movie, but it's based on a white savior kind of narrative. Right. So I wanted to talk today about white supremacism. So white people are the dominant group in the US and Canada. They have institutional and social and political power. And they've had that power for quite some time, right? Basically since the beginning of the United States and the beginning of Canada, white people have been the dominant group. And so they have been able to create the values and social norms and political systems and laws and all kinds of things that kind of privilege them or make their lives easier. And they disadvantage peoples of color. But kind of one of the things that's interesting about the hardcore white supremacists is they see things the other way around, okay? So they don't see themselves as the powerful dominant group. They see themselves as the group that is persecuted, the group that is under threat, okay? And so what I'd like to do is read a little bit about this and talk about the perspective of these people. Because again, I've been kind of pushing this idea that white people are the dominant group, we're the ones that have the power, we're the ones that are advantaged in society. And again, white supremacists have kind of a slightly different take on it. So I've got this article for you to read. It is in Microsoft Teams.
Article again.
What's that?
Article again.
Article again. Maybe video tomorrow. Maybe video tomorrow. No, I don't have a whole movie. You want to watch Black Panther?
Yeah.
Me too. Me too. Wakanda forever. We'll take some time. We'll read this. We'll answer the questions, and then we'll go from there, like we often do. Okay. Let me put up some time here. Yeah. Sexual watermelon? What's Watermelon Man? I don't know that one. Okay, people, can we talk about a few of these? Okay, so I know there's a bewildering collection of different organizations here, and again, I'm not asking you to remember each and every one of them because there's, again, a lot of them, and they kind of appear and disappear, and their kind of characteristics are a little bit blurry, and so I'm not asking you to remember every little group that exists because there's too many of them, right? But let me ask you this first question here. So what's one of the major causes of domestic terrorism and hate crimes in the U.S. today? White supremacists, right? Do you think that's what most Americans think or feel or believe about terrorism? Vera says no. What do you think?
I have the idea that, I'm sorry, but they probably picture the terrorists from the Middle East with exhibitor clothing, and if you taught them that, oh, white people are killing Americans, they would probably look ugly.
Exactly, right? So that's kind of, in a way, that's very challenging to probably an American or even a Western stereotype because, again, it's the same thing as when we talked about the stereotypical kindergarten teacher or the stereotypical college professor. When you say, what does a terrorist look like, what comes to mind in most people's head, right? Probably someone from the Middle East, right? Someone maybe dressed in robes. Maybe they're a suicide bomber and they have, dynamite strapped to their chest or something like that. I don't know. Maybe someone with a big long beard. Who knows? But that's much more likely to kind of come to people's mind when they think of terrorist. But again, what's interesting is that if you look at the statistics, you'll see that if you're in the United States and Canada, when you think of what does a terrorist look like, it looks like me. Like I'm what you should be thinking of in terms of what does a terrorist look like, not a person from the Middle East. Because again, the statistics show us that terrorism predominantly comes from white supremacists and white people, not immigrants, not the Taliban, not ISIS, not anyone else. So for terror attacks within the United States, they are predominantly white people, right? So, but again, that's not what people think, right? Because they have a stereotype of terrorists looking a certain way. Where do you think that stereotype comes from? Huh? Why do you think people? Would you let me back it up a little bit? Would you agree that if you asked most Canadians and Americans, if you said, "Quick, think of a terrorist. Picture a terrorist in your head," do you think they would come up with someone kind of Middle Eastern looking?
Yeah.
Probably. Okay, so but why did they think of that? Where does that stereotype come from? Huh?
Like the terrorist building.
Right, we have some very famous terrorists in the media, right? We have Osama bin Laden. We all know what kind of he looks like, and for most of the 2000s, he was a terrorist that got referred to a lot in the media. George, what did he say?
I was gonna say what he said was famous terrorist, just mentioned
Right, so there was this famous, very famous terror case in the 2000s, and people were hunting, where in the world is Osama bin Laden kind of thing, and he was very popular, and so people may have absorbed his image as part of their stereotype. Right. So yeah. So we do have a lot of news reports about conflicts in the Middle East, either within countries or between countries, and certainly the recent history has seen a lot of that with Syria and the Islamic State, and then we had the Iraq War before that, and the Gulf War before that. There's been conflicts in between Israel and Palestine for a long time. Egypt and Israel have gotten into a few scuffs. There's the Lebanon issue and Israel's conflicts with Lebanon. Iran is in there. And so there have been a lot of conflicts in that part of the world, both within countries and between countries, right? And so, yeah, people might have a stereotype of that people from that part of the world being associated with conflict and military conflict and perhaps terrorism. And yeah, perhaps this idea that somehow those areas are less civilized than the Western world, right? So yeah, there's part of that too. So news media definitely plays a role, right? We definitely got a lot of coverage in the 2000s about Osama bin Laden. We heard a lot about him, and we've heard a lot of about Middle Eastern conflicts going, all the way back really to the 1960s, right? When Israel is kind of created as a state, and then the Israelis and the Palestinians sort of immediately get into a conflict about it, and that's a whole other story. But yeah, we've gotten used to hearing those kinds of stories and ideas coming from that part of the world. That's true, right? What else? Where else might these stereotypes come from?
In Middle East, people might have fought for their rights, and then they've been associated with being a terrorist, as if they wanted to stand up for their rights.
Right. So, to some degree, I guess terrorism is terrorism, right? So, but how terrorists are viewed depends greatly on who is viewing them, right? And so, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, right? Standing up for the rights of the people. And so, again, Western people who might be looking at that part of the world and don't really understand the kind of political situation within the country, they might just see, a bunch of terrorists, rather than maybe people, opposing the government or opposing some sort of armed intervention or something like that. So they might not appreciate the complexity of what's happening within the country. And I would almost guarantee you that they don't. I would pay good money to hear most Canadians describe what's happening in Syria, because I don't think most people know at all what's going on there. And to be honest, I will put my hand up and say I am not fully versed in what is happening there as well. I know a little bit, but it's a very complicated situation. There's a lot of players involved, and but often that's the case. What about movies? Do you think movies have a role in this?
Yeah.
There's a movie called, there's this guy who was supposed to be a terrorist, but he went to New York.
A guy is supposed to be a terrorist and he went to New York. I don't know, but movies can help solidify these stereotypes too, right? Particularly action movies, because action movies need a bad guy, right? They need a villain. And so if you look back into the 1990s and 80s and 70s, who do you think was always the bad guy in Western movies?
Either the Black or the Middle East or something else.
No, it wasn't really the Middle East. Who were the kind of big opponents of the United States?
Russia.
Yeah, Russia. So if you look back at movies from the 80s and 70s and 60s, you'll see lots of Russians as the bad guy. Pretty much every old James Bond movie, it's always the Russians, right? It's always the Russians that are the bad guy, right? And so, but again, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Hollywood filmmakers need a new bad guy, right? And so who did they find? Well, they found people from the Middle East, right? And so often you'll see in kind of 90s movies, you'll see that people who are vaguely Middle Eastern will be cast as the villain. Who was I just thinking of? Yeah. So you'll see that happen as well. So movies have a role to play here too, because are you thinking of something there, Liana? No. Movies have a role to play here too, because sometimes you need to find a villain, and sometimes in geopolitical terms, it's easy to find a villain in the country, the country or the people that your country fears. And for most of the 60s and 70s and 80s, the U.S. feared the Soviet Union, right? And Aliana and Adel and I just talked about that this morning, where we talked about the fact that during the 1950s, the Americans were paranoid about communists. And they thought there was communists everywhere. There was spies infiltrating all areas of American life, and people were totally freaked out about it. And so, there was movies made like that, This Is Tomorrow, right? America Under Communism, and there was lots of James Bond films that were created with Russians as the bad guys, and so people were kind of that stereotype was kind of being created. And then when the Soviet Union collapsed, filmmakers needed a new villain. George?
The Dictator, you know that?
The Dictator.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more of a comedy film, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but same thing.
Yeah, that was filmed here, I think.
Here?
Yeah, with Seth Rogen and who else is in it? Sacha Baron Cohen. Oh no, Sacha Baron. I'm thinking of something else. Yeah, Sacha Baron Cohen's Dictator. Yeah, yeah, and so his Dictator is very Middle Eastern in appearance, right? But again, regardless of where those stereotypes come from and sort of any kind of truth that lies behind them, in terms of terror attacks in the U.S., white people should be thinking of other white people, because that's who the statistics say commit terrorist attacks. And until the World Trade Center, I don't know if you want to call them bombings or the World Trade Center attacks in 2001, the most destructive terrorist attack in U.S. history was perpetrated by a white guy, by a guy named Timothy McVeigh. He bombed. He's the whitest person you've ever seen. He bombed the Oklahoma City government building. I think he had some anti-government opposition, and he parked like a big rental U-Haul truck full of like ammonium fertilizer in front of the building, and basically leveled half of the building. And we'll take a break in a minute, and you can Google some pictures of it, and he nearly brought down the entire building.
When was it?
This was I want to say 1989. Might be wrong about that. We can Google it on the break. But up until September 11th, that was the biggest terrorist attack on U.S. soil, perpetrated by a white American, and hugely destructive. Like the picture of this building is just unbelievable. But yeah, so again, in contrast to the stereotypes of what Americans might think that a terrorist looks like, again, if you're thinking of a terrorist in the US or Canada, you should be thinking of white guys, right? And this even goes up to even a few weeks ago, if you were paying attention to the news, there was actually a plot by a group of basically alt-right or white supremacist or I don't know what you want to call them, but they actually had a plan to kidnap the Wisconsin state governor. And people, well, you laugh, but it was a real thing. They were going to do it, and they were caught, I think, by the FBI, but before they did anything. But one of the criticisms that came out of that story was some media outlets called these guys a militia. Oh, they're a militia, and they plan to kidnap the governor. And other people said, no, they're terrorists, right? If these guys that plan to kidnap the governor, if they were people of color, you'd be calling them terrorists. But because they're white, you're calling them a militia or some other group, right? And some people were saying, no, you should refer to these people as terrorists. You're just not doing it because you don't want to label white people as terrorists. You want to give them another label. But anyway, a militia is basically a loosely organized military group. doesn't really, sometimes has some, usually doesn't have any legal authority. Yeah. Anyway, okay, let's take a break though. That's kind of where I wanted to stop that. We'll take a break. We'll come back here and talk about, more. Yeah. Okay, and we're back. Yes. So the first two questions we said, yeah, one of the major causes of domestic terrorism and hate crimes in the United States are, in fact, white supremacist groups. And again, this is kind of strange because, as I say, most people, probably in the US and Canada, hold stereotypes that terrorists look like a certain type of person, right? And usually whatever image you might conjure up in your head, that person's not white. But the stats say that actually most hate crimes and most terrorist incidents actually come from white people. I just thought I'd show you this here. Yeah. So this is the person who was convicted of, up until September 11th, the worst sort of terrorism incident, domestic terrorism incident in the U.S. And so, as you can see here, sorry, 1995. My bad. 1995 bombed the Oklahoma City, government building, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, and as you can see here, I'm just looking for the death toll. Do you see it? Oh, there we go. Killed 168 people and injured 680 others. Yeah. Here's a picture. Yeah.
Is that even possible? Like is it like a truck full of bomb?
Yeah. He's a Gulf War veteran, so he was a ex-military guy, and so knew a thing or two about explosives, and basically filled a rental truck or rental van full of them and parked it in front of the building and set it off, and basically almost leveled the entire building.
He got executed after this, right?
I think he did.
Yeah.
Does it say that there?
Yeah, I guess no way like they
There.
keep them in jail.
Yeah, executed by lethal injection,
Yeah.
2001.
They must have like let him suffer or something.
That's a whole other question about how people should be punished, but
Yeah.
yeah, up until September 11th, this was the worst terrorist attack on American soil, and again, it was perpetrated by an American, right, and by a white person. But again, sometimes because of people's prejudicial or stereotypical ideas, it becomes much easier to forget someone like Timothy McVeigh, and it becomes much more difficult to forget someone like Osama bin Laden. And again, it's not to say that the World Trade Center attacks were not significant and horrible, because they absolutely were. But it's interesting how those attacks much more firmly stick in the minds of Americans, whereas this one seems largely forgotten. And
I don't even know about it.
yeah, exactly. And again, up until the World Trade Center attacks, this was the worst one. And as you can see, pretty destructive, right? I'm actually shocked that only 168 people died, considering the sort of damage that you see there.
How tall was that building?
What's that?
How tall was that?
Let me just have a look here. Well, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I don't know, 10 or 12 floors? It's kind of hard to tell. What's that? I think it said it was the Alfred R. Let me just see here. Alfred R. Murrah Federal Building. Okay, so there you go. That's what it looked like when it was built in 1977. Does it say how many floors? Maybe it. Whoops, hang on. Oh boy. There we go. Yeah, demolished after the attack, so that, yeah, they didn't repair it, obviously. Yeah, it doesn't say. Yeah. Okay, that's enough about the building. Okay. Here we go. Right. So the third question I want to ask you here, so what kinds of views are held by the radical right? What do we mean by when we say right? In this case, what does the radical right mean? Yeah, so what we're talking about is this. We're talking about the political spectrum. Have we seen this in this class yet or no?
No, not yet.
No? Okay. I've definitely used this in history, right? So we haven't talked about it. This is the political spectrum, okay? And so this is often used to help describe where people sit in terms of their views on government and society, okay? So there's people who are out on the left, and there's people that are out on the right, and there are people who are kind of close to the center. And so, as you can see here, people who are further out on the left can be thought of in a couple of different ways. And so the way you can kind of think about this is how people view the government in terms of their involvement in people's economic lives and their involvement in people's kind of social lives, okay? So if you're out on the left, usually people who are out on the left feel that the government should intervene in people's lives in an economic way, okay? So people on the left often support lots of social programs and like retirement pensions and student loans and free health care like we have here in Canada, yay! Those kind of things are kind of left-wing ideas, okay? And so the government kind of provides a lot of support for the people with social programs. Usually taxes are a little bit higher to pay for those things. And so people on the left are very comfortable with the government being involved in their lives in an economic way, right? Hey, Nav, lots of social programs, lots of supports, lots of money to the people kind of thing. In terms of their social lives, people on the left think the government really shouldn't be involved in people's social lives. And what that means is that people on the left are usually more accepting of diversity. And so they're more accepting of immigration and multiculturalism. They're usually more accepting of things like homosexuality and gay marriage and gender non-binary people. All these things, the people on the left feel that the government shouldn't really have any role in determining, who the people are, right? And so people are just people. People on the left are not really too, they're very accepting of diversity in all kinds of different ways, usually, not always. If you go out on the right, you'll see kind of the opposite pattern. And so people on the right often feel that the government should not involve themselves in kind of the economic lives of the people. So people on the right feel that taxes should be kept low. There shouldn't really be a lot of social programs. People should take care of themselves. And so they're kind of against things like free health care because people should be able to just buy the insurance they want if they want any at all, or if they don't want any, that's fine, that's their business. People on the right prefer a little less government regulation in the market. People on the right want small government and government to kind of stay out of the market and stay out of the lives of people, and people kind of have the freedom to just kind of take care of themselves, okay? On the other hand, people on the right tend to be more socially conservative, and so they kind of like to maintain their traditions. They want to kind of keep society the way it is. People on the left are more interested in, changing things and making things better. People on the right prefer to keep things as they are. They're conservative. Sometimes they tend to be more religious. And sometimes they can be less accepting of diversity as well. And so people on the right are kind of less into immigration. They're less into multiculturalism. They kind of want to keep society the way it's always been, sort of thing. Often you see very predictable patterns. And so in most countries, what you'll often see is that people who live in the countryside, in the rural areas, they're often more right-wing. They're often more conservative. People who live in the cities are often more left-wing. They're more kind of liberal and open to change. Usually you see that. You definitely saw it in the US election. if you watch the election results come in, you saw that most of the cities and urban areas voted for Joe Biden. They voted Democratic, and most of the sort of rural areas or the countryside areas were Republican or voting for Trump. And so, again, you see that in a lot of countries. You see it definitely here in Canada. Our rural areas are more conservative, and our urban areas are more liberal and NDP sort of thing, usually. And then, of course, there's people in the center. So in most kind of, in a country like Canada or the US, really most people are pretty close to the center, right? And people kind of lean a little bit right or lean a little bit left. If you go all the way left, you're into full-on communism, right? Where the government basically controls every aspect of the economy, everybody works for the state, and the state has kind of full control. If you go all the way to the right, you get to fascism, where there's some control of the state, but there's a lot of focus on the people and the nation and who the people are. And so if you think about maybe Adolf Hitler and his ideas about this pure German race, and everybody who wasn't purely German in Germany had to kind of disappear, that's a heavy, heavy fascist idea. And so, again, in a country like the US or Canada, almost nobody is out on the extremes. Almost everybody is right in the middle. And I don't have any data to back this up, but overall, I think Canada leans a little bit to the left. So on average, we're a reasonably kind of liberal left-wing country. I think the US leans a little further right than us. So the US is kind of in the center or leaning to the right. The Republicans, frighteningly, seem to be leaning further right every year, which is very concerning. But you're also seeing a bit of a reaction to that on the left, too. And so if you pay attention to American politics, people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they're leaning further left, right? They're almost they want more socialist ideas integrated into the US. But for some of the right-wing conservatives in the US, socialism is a dirty word, right? And they will have none of it. They want none of that socialism in their country. So anyway, this is just a way of describing where people sit. And so people in the alt-right, of course, are leaning to the right, right? And quite a bit further than most people are. So lots of people are, conservative, or they're a little bit right-wing, and of course that doesn't make them bad people. And lots of people lean slightly to the left, and of course that doesn't make them bad people either. But again, there are some people that lean, a lot further out than the average person. And so, and again, even in Canada here, you'll see that, we have a Conservative Party for Canada headed by Aaron O'Toole, and they don't lean very far right in the grand scheme of things. They're pretty close to the center. Same thing with Justin Trudeau's Liberals. Yes, he's liberal and he's left-wing, but he's not leaning that far left, right? So most political parties cluster around the center because that's where most of Canadians are, and that's where everybody votes. There's very few people who are out on the far edges. There's actually a Communist Party in Canada, believe it or not.
What, really?
Yeah, there's like 300 people in it. It's not.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. It's not very. As I say, very few of us have an extreme view like that. So yeah, there's a Communist Party. There's like 300 people in it. They get no votes. Nobody cares about them. They're basically like a hobby for some people. They have no chance at power at all. But again, so there's very few people out on the edges. Most people are in the center, and they lean just a little left or a little right.
What's the difference between radical right and alt right?
Probably not much. So the question is, what's the difference between the alt-right and the radical right? And again, as it's described in the article here, the alt-right is kind of a collection of random people who are against things, right? And so what are they against, these alt-right people? Multiculturalism, sometimes. Sometimes abortion. What else are alt-right people? What are alt-right people pushing back against, or what do they not like?
Essentially
Equality, yeah. Feminism sometimes. Sometimes they're misogynistic, these alt-righters. Sometimes they're anti-democracy. Sometimes they're sometimes they're anti-LGBTQ or anti-homosexuality, anti-immigration, anti-diversity. And again, the alt-right is a collection of random people, right? So not all of them have exactly the same views, but we kind of stick them all in this bucket, this complicated group of people.
Wait, so they're fascism, right?
Some of them lean towards fascism. Fascism, as we talked about in history, is sometimes a little bit difficult to define, and it kind of means different things in different times. Okay. But a fascist government is kind of very much like this. It's an authoritarian government that has full control of the country. They put the state above the rights of the people, and usually they have some sort of idea about their nation being great, right? And by nation, I mean like a group of people. And so there's kind of this fascist narrative that they all use where once we were great, once our nation was great, now it is not great anymore, but we will be great again, and I, the leader, will make it great, right? That's a very common fascist leader narrative, and we see in history, we saw Benito Mussolini use it, we saw Adolf Hitler use it, others have used it since then. It falls into Donald Trump's narrative too of make America great again, right? Once we were great, now we're not, but we're going to be again, and I will make you great. That was a very fascist-y thing of him to say. So people on the alt-right are kind of leaning out to the right. Some of them are kind of more fascist-y than others. Some of them are just racists and misogynists. Again, it's a complicated group because it's not a clear ideology. It's not a clear set of principles. They're just kind of upset and angry, and they're upset and angry at all kinds of different things. And some of them have, they're a complicated group of people. Jack here, which side will affect people's lives more severely? I would say that that's a good question actually, Jack. Probably the further out you go on either end of this spectrum, the more effect it has on people's lives, okay? So if we look at, let's say we're in Canada here, and most of the time, almost all the time, we have either a liberal government or a conservative government, okay? Conservatives lean a little bit right, the liberals lean a little bit left. To be honest, regardless of whether we have a liberal or conservative government, people's lives in Canada don't change that much because both of them they just lean slightly to one side, right? And so, if Justin Trudeau gets kicked out next election and we get Erin O'Toole or someone else, not a lot of people's lives will change significantly, right? I've lived through a number of liberal governments and a number of conservative governments. For most people, there's not that big of a difference, right? But again, the further out you go, the more extreme it becomes, right? So yeah, if you wind up with a fascist government in your country, your life is going to be affected. And we saw that in V for Vendetta, right? In V for Vendetta, it's a movie we watched in history where an authoritarian fascist government takes control of England. And so yeah, things change pretty radically for England, right? Same thing for communism. If your country has a communist revolution, yeah, your life is going to change quite significantly. So again, the further out you go, the more effect it's going to have on people's lives. But when you're close to the center, not much changes. And again, for most Canadians, whether they have one government or another, it's pretty much status quo, right? Not a lot really changes. Gabrielle says, so both communism and fascism in theory are bad. Well, both systems put the good of the state and or the nation ahead of, or the ideology ahead of individual rights. And so that's kind of that's the criticism that most people in democratic nations have of both fascism and communism, is that your individual rights and freedoms are subject to the state. And so whatever is good for the state, that's what gets done. And again, if it means, forcing collectivized agriculture on people or sending people to a slave labor camp to mine gold for the state, or simply executing 5 to 7 million Jewish people because they just don't fit in your country, that all becomes okay because the good of the state or the nation comes before individual human and civil rights. But in a democratic state, it's the opposite, right? So in a democratic state, my individual rights come before the state, right? Or at least are protected by the state, always. You look slightly confused, Avera.
I'm trying to figure out North Korea is communist and fascist.
Yeah, North Korea is a weird animal. North Korea is a weird animal. So North Korea has a kind of a socialist economy or a communist economy. And so again, everyone works for the state. There's no private industry or private enterprise. All economic activity is controlled by the state. And so it's a very socialist or communist idea. Kim Jong-un is more of a fascist, and he runs his country in a fascisty kind of way or an authoritarian kind of way. But really without any of the, since the only people in North Korea are North Koreans, there's no real attempt to destroy or remove people of other ethnicities or origins because they just aren't there. So that kind of piece that you usually see in fascism is not present because it's only North Koreans, but he kind of operates Kim Jong-un, I think, operates his government in a very fascisty way, but their economy is very much based in like a communist ideology, I think. But yeah, North Korea is a weird animal. Yeah. Does everyone kind of know, like if you looked at this, could you kind of place yourself on this spectrum? Like, do you know where you might sit?
Where are you?
Where am I? I definitely lean left. Not super far, but I'm kind of, it's hard to know where to place yourself, but I'm probably somewhere between the socialism and the liberalism
Yeah, more of a liberal.
thing. Like, some of the things that Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are saying in the United States, I agree with them, absolutely. I usually vote NDP here in Canada. The New Democratic Party leans a little further left than the Liberal Party does. Not a lot, but a little bit. So I usually vote NDP. But sometimes you'll see when these parties get into power, they tend to operate as if they're closer to the center than you might think. And so again, when you elect a government, that's why in Canada people's lives don't change very much, because they'll promise something out here, and then they'll kind of move towards the center. And so again, often there's not a huge difference between which party gets into power, because they're clustered so closely to the center that it just doesn't usually make a lot of difference for Canada. But yeah, I'm out on the left for sure, and I'm probably, I'm not advocating for full socialism, but some socialism is a good idea, right? Our healthcare system in Canada is a socialist idea, and it was proposed by a socialist political party that existed at the time. And so, yeah, that's a great system, right? If I need a heart transplant, I can get it free. That's pretty good. right? The United States cannot promise that to you, to its citizens. So, yeah, some socialist ideas are good and they support the people, and I support those ideas. But again, not everybody agrees with that, right? Okay, we're way off track, but that's okay. So the alt-right here are, are people who are kind of, again, further out on the right than your average person. Sometimes they're into full-on fascism, but often they just hold kind of really extreme views about, again, about immigrants, about race, or they are racists. Sometimes they're misogynists. Sometimes they are anti-immigration. Sometimes they're just people who like to cause trouble, like internet trolls and things like that. There's all kinds of people who are out there on the right that hold these kind of, you know, a mix of racist or sexist or homophobic or a combination of those views, or they just like to cause trouble and annoy people, right? And so there's all kinds of people mixed into that group. What kind of groups do you think are likely to be part of these alt-right? Who do you think the alt-right is made up of in terms of social groups? What about gender? Yeah, overwhelmingly alt-right people are men. Not all of them are, but overwhelmingly they are. What about race or ethnicity?
White.
Yeah, they are white people almost exclusively. What about religion? Yeah, some sort of version of Christian is probably, and we can see that in a number of these groups. Christianity is an important part of how they see the world, right? What about economic class? What do you think about these people?
Like in the middle.
These alt-righters? Sometimes middle, sometimes, yeah, it probably really depends. I suspect that like the upper class are not really, you wouldn't find them as part of these groups, but I think pretty much everyone below there, upper middle class, lower middle class for sure, I think you would find all of those people mixed in. Sexuality?
Male.
What's that? Sexuality? Who is the alt-right probably made up of?
Male.
Heterosexuals, right? Because so many of them are against homosexuality, right? They're anti-LGBTQ, and so, yeah, this is a group. These alt-righters are kind of, you know, they have different views on things, and they kind of hate or disapprove of certain things. But almost all of them are probably white males coming from a Christian background, right? Okay, I'm going to end it there because there's a few other things to talk about, but we got a little bit off track, but that's okay. I think it was still worth it. That's all for today, good people. I will see you tomorrow. Have a nice afternoon. Tomorrow's Friday, so that's cool. Okay, see you.